The Grey King, Day 7. The Warestone. Bran got to his feet, brushing off dust and grass. Will gaped at him. You just cycled all the way from Clwyd? Bran nodded. Caradog Pritchard came roaring up in his van this morning looking for Penn. He is dead set on shooting him. I was frightened, Will, the way he looks. He is not like a man at all, and I think he has been hunting all night for John Rollins and Penn. He was all creased looking and not shaved. His breath was coming more normally now. He picked up his bicycle. Come on, quick. Where should we go? I don't know. Anywhere, just away from here. He tugged his bicycle over the bank edging the lane at the left and led them off through the bushes and trees towards the open moorland that stretched back down the valley away from the lake. Will scrambled after him with Penn at his side. But does he really know we are here? He couldn't. That's the only part I don't understand, Bran said. He was having a big argument with your cousin Riz about where Penn was, and then suddenly he stopped in the middle of it and went very quiet. It was almost as if he were listening. Then he said, I know where they are gone. They are gone to the lake. Just like that, Riz tried to talk him out of it, but I don't think that worked. Somehow Pritchard just knew. I'm positive he's on his way to Tybont. Penn, hey! He whistled, and the dog paused ahead, waiting for them. They were walking on rising ground now, through waist-high bracken, on a meandering sheep path. How did you get here before him, then? Will said. Bran looked over his shoulder with a quick grin. He had moved ahead on the path, pushing his bike. Something seemed to have transformed him out of the figure of despair Will had seen the day before. Caradog Pritchard will not be too pleased about that, Bran said solemnly. I had my clasp knife in my pocket, you see, and I happened to be passing his van when he was not looking, and I stuck it in his back tire and gave it a good jerk. And while I was at it, I stuck it in his spare tire, too. You know the way he has the spare bolted onto the side of the van? A mistake, that is. He should keep it inside. The tension inside Will snapped like a breaking spring, and he began to laugh. Once he had started, it was hard to stop. Bran paused, grinning, and then the grin became a chuckle, and before long they were reeling with laughter, roaring to tottering, clutching at one another in a wild fit of chortling mirth, with the dog Penn leaping about them happily. Imagine his face, Will gasped, when he goes tearing off in the van, and poof, the tire goes flat, and he gets out furious and changes it, and goes tearing off again, and poof, they collapsed again, gurgling. Bran took off his dark glasses and wiped them. Mind you, he said, it is going to make everything worse in the long run, because he will know very well somebody cut the tires on purpose, and that will just make him wilder than ever. Worth it, Will said, controlled again, but cheerful. He gave Bran a sideways, rather shy glance. Hey, he said, it was nice of you to come, considering. Oh, well, Bran said. He put his glasses back on, retreating once more into inscrutability. His white hair lay damp, darkened lines across his forehead. He seemed about to say something, but changed his mind. Come on, he said, jumped on his bicycle and began pedaling erratically off along the weaving path through the bracken. Will began to run. Where are we going? Goodness knows. They careered along in a happy lunatic chase through the valley, over open slopes, down into hollows, up over ridges, in and out of rounded lichened rocks, through grass and bracken and heather and gorse, and quite often on damper ground near one of the little streams that fed the river, through reeds and his iris leaves. They had come a long way from the lake. This was the main valley land now, open grazing land merging into the arable fields of Clwyd and Pritchard's farm further down, past the jutting hills. Suddenly Bran skidded, tumbled sideways, thinking he had fallen. Will went to help, but Bran grabbed his arm and pointed urgently across the moorland. Over there, on the road. There's a curve a long way down where you can see cars coming. Before they get here, I'm almost sure I saw Pritchard's van. Will grabbed Penn by the collar and looked wildly about. We must get under cover. Behind those rocks over there? Wait, I see where we are. There's a better place just up here. Come on. Bran bumped off. The big sheepdog slipped from Will's hand and bounded after him. Will ran. They rounded a group of nearby trees, and there beyond it was the glimmer of gray stone and slate, behind a low, ruined wall. The cottage looked quite different from behind. Will did not recognize it until too late. Bran had shot inside, thumping open the broken back door before he could call to prevent him, and then there was no alternative but to follow. Naked to the eye of the Grey King, feeling the force of the dark pressing sudden and strong on him like a huge hand, he stumbled after the dog and the white-haired boy into the cottage from which the Milgwyn had stolen the wounded sheep. The cottage where Owen Davies had fought Caradog Pritchard for the woman who had borne and deserted Bran. The cottage haunted, now more than ever, by the malice of the rising dark. But Bran, propping his bicycle against the wall, was bright and unaffected. Isn't this perfect? It's an old shepherd's hut. No one's used it for years. Quick, over here. Keep your head down. They crouched beside the window, Penn lying quiet beside them, and saw through the jagged-edged hole the small gray van passing perhaps 50 yards away on the road. Pritchard was driving slowly. They could see him peering from side to side, scouring the land. He glanced in curiously at the cottage and drove on. The van disappeared along the road to Tal Wylin. Bran leaned back against the wall. Whew, lucky. But Will was paying no attention. He was too occupied with shielding his mind from the raging malevolence of the Grey King. He said through his teeth, the words coming slow and dragging. Let's get away from here. Bran stared at him and asked no questions. All right, then. Tiered Yama, Pen. He turned to the dog, and suddenly his voice came high as the wind in the telegraph wires. Pen, what is it? Look at him, Will. The dog lay flat on his stomach, his forelegs splayed outwards, his head down sideways against the floor. It was horrible, unnatural, a position impossible for any normal living creature. A faint whistling whine came from his throat, but he did not move. It was as if invisible pins had held him forced flat against the ground. Pen, Will said in horror. Pen. But he could not lift the dog's head. The animal was not paralyzed by any natural circumstance. Only enchantment could force him so hard to the earth that no living hand could move him. What is it? There was fear in Bran's face. It's the bread in the lid, Will said. His tone seemed to Bran deeper than before and most resonant. It is the bread in the lid, and he has forgotten the bargain that he made when we spoke yesterday. He has forgotten that he gave me 1 night and 1 day. You spoke to him? Bran heard his voice come out in a broken whisper, and he crouched there motionless beside the window. But again Will was paying no attention. He spoke half to himself in the same strange adult voice. It is sent not at me, but at the dog. It is indirect, then a device. I wonder. He broke off and glanced at Bran, waving a finger at him in a warning. You may watch me if you will, though it would be better not. But you must say nothing and make no move, not one. All right, Bran said. He watched, crouching on the dirty, broken slate floor in one corner, and he saw Will move to the middle of the room to stand beside the hideous, prostrate dog. Will bent and picked up a broken piece of wood from the litter of the empty years that lay scattered everywhere. He touched it to the ground before his feet, and, turning, drew a circle about Pen and himself on the floor with the tip of the stick. When the circle was drawn, a ring of blue flame sprang up, and when it was complete, Will relaxed and stood full upright, like someone freed of a great burden that had been weighing him down. He raised the stick vertically in the air over his head so that it touched the low ceiling, and he said some words in a language that Bran did not understand. The cottage seemed to grow very dark, so that Bran's weak eyes, blinking, could see nothing but the blue ring and cold fire, and Will's form shadowy in the middle of it. But then he saw that another light was beginning to glow in the room, a small blue spark somewhere in the far corner, steadily growing brighter until it blazed with such intensity that he was forced to look away. Will said something sharp and angry in the language that Bran could not understand. The circle of blue flames flared high and then low, high, low, high, and low, 3 times, and then suddenly went out. Instantly the cottage was full of daylight again, and the brilliant star of light nowhere to be seen. Bran let out a long, slow breath, staring about the room to try and see where the light had been, but the room seemed now so different and ordinary that he could not tell. Nor could he imagine where the circle had been drawn, though he knew it had been round Will. Will, standing there unmoving, was the only thing in the room that seemed not to have changed utterly in that 1 second, and even he seemed now once more different, a boy as he had been, but glaring around the floor irritably as if peering for an errant marble that had rolled away. He glanced at Bran and said crossly, "Come and look at this." Then, without waiting, while Bran scrambled nervously up, he crossed to the far corner of the room, crouched, and began rifling through a small pile of bits of stone that lay there, randomly scattered and dusty among the debris. Pushing them aside, he cleared a space in which one small white pebble lay alone. He said to Bran, "Pick it up." Puzzled, Bran reached out and took the pebble. He found that he could not pick it up. He worked at it with his fingers. He stood up, straddled it, and tried with his thumbs and forefingers to pull it up from the floor. He stared at the pebble and then at Will. "It's part of the floor. It must be. The floor's made of slate," Will said. He still sounded cross, almost petulant. "Well, yes, no stones and slate, true, but all the same, it's fixed now, somehow. Bit of quartz. It won't budge." "It's a wearstone," Will said, his voice flat now and weary. "The awareness of the Grey King. I might have guessed. It is, in this place, his eyes and ears and his mouth. Through it, just through the fact of its lying there, he not only knows everything that happens in this place, but can send out his power to do certain things. Only certain things. Not any very magic. But, for instance, he is able so to paralyze Pen there that we can no more move him than we can move the wearstone itself." Bran knelt in distress beside the dog and stroked the head flattened so unnaturally against the floor. "But if Caradog Pritchard tracks us here, he might, his dogs might, then he will shoot Pen where he lies, and there will be nothing we can do to help." Will said bitterly, "That's the idea." "But, Will, that can't happen. You've got to do something." "There's just one thing that I can do," Will said, "though obviously I can't tell you what it is with that one thing there. It means I shall have to borrow your bicycle, but I'm not too sure whether you should stay here alone. Somebody's got to. We can't leave Pen like that, not on his own." "I know, but the wearstone." Will glared at the pebble as if it were some infuriating small child sitting there clutching an object too precious for it to hold. "It's not a particularly powerful weapon," he said, "but it's one of the oldest. We all use them, both the light and the dark. There are rules, sort of. None of us can actually be affected by a wearstone, only observed. That wretched pebble can give the Great King an idea of what I do and say here, A general idea, like an image. It's not as specific as a television set, mercifully. It can't do anything to harm me or stop me doing what I want to do, except through the control it has over objects. I mean, it can't actually affect me, because I am an old one, but it can transmit the power of the dark, or of the light, if it happened to belong to an old one, to affect men and animals and things of the earth. It can stop Ben from moving, and therefore stop me from moving him. You see, so that if you stay here, there's no knowing what exactly it's able to do to you. Bren said obstinately, I don't care. He sat cross-legged by the dog. It can't kill me, can it? Oh, no. Well, then, I'm staying. Go on off with the bike. Will nodded as if that was what he had been expecting. I'll be as quick as I can, but take care. Stay very wide awake. If anything happens, it will come in the way you least expect. Then he was gone out of the door, and Bran was left in the cottage with the dog pressed impossibly flat against the slate floor by an invisible high wind, staring at a small white stone. Good day, Mrs. Jones. How are you? Well, thank you, Mr. Pritchard. And you? Caradog Pritchard's plump face was glistening with sweat, impatience swept away with Welsh politeness. He said abruptly, Where's John Rollins? John? Said Cozy Meg Jones, wiping floury hands on her apron. There now, what a shame. You have missed him. Idris and him went off to Albergano half an hour ago. They will not be back until dinner, and that will be late today. You want to see him urgently? Is it, Mr. Pritchard? Caradog Pritchard stared at her vacantly and did not answer. He said in a high-typed voice, Is Roland's dog here? Pen? Goodness, no. Mrs. Jones said truthfully. Not with John gone. She smiled amiably at him. Is it the man you want to see or the dog, then? Well, indeed, you are welcome to wait for them here, though I can say it may be quite a time. Let me get you a cup of tea, Mr. Pritchard, and a nice fresh Welsh cake. No, said Pritchard, running his hand distractedly through his red raw hair. No, thank you. He was so lost in his own mind that he scarcely seemed to be aware of her at all. I will be off to town and see if I find them there. At the Crown, perhaps. John Rollins has some business with Idris Tybont, does he? Oh, said Mrs. Jones comfortably. He is just visiting, since he had something to do in Abergynolmen. Anyway, it's a call, you know, Mr. Pritchard, like your own. She beamed innocent at him. Well, said Caradog Pritchard, thank you very much. Goodbye. Megan Jones looked after him as he swung the gray van hastily round and drove away down the lane. Her smile faded. Not a nice man, she said to the farmyard at large. And something is going on beyond those little eyes of his that is not nice at all. A very lucky thing is that it was that young Will happened to take that dog for a walk just now. Will pedaled hard, blessing the valley road for its winding flatness and free-wheeling only when his pounding heart seemed about to leap right out of his chest. He rode one-handed. He had said nothing about his hurt arm, and Bran had not noticed, but it hurt abominably if he so much as touched the handlebars with his left hand. He tried not to think about it the way it would feel when carrying the golden harp. That was the only thing to be done now. The music of the harp was the only magic within his reach that would release Pen from the power of the Warestone. In any case, it was time to bring the harp to the pleasant lake to accomplish its deeper purpose. Everything was coming together, as if two roads led to the same mountain pass. He could only hope that the pass would now be blocked by some obstacle able to hinder both at once. This time, more than ever, the matter of holding the dark at bay depended on as much on the decisions and emotions of men as the strength of the light, perhaps even more. Broken sunlight flickered in and out of his eyes as clouds scudded briskly over the sky. At least, he thought wryly, we've got a good day for it all. His wheels sang on the road. He was nearly at Wood Farm now. He wondered how he was to explain his sudden arrival and equally sudden departure afterwards to Aunt Jen. She would probably be the only one there. She must have been there for Caradog Pritchard's appearance earlier that morning and changing of his two mutilated tires. Perhaps he could say that he had come to get something to help put Pritchard off the scent, to keep him from finding Pen, something John Rollins had suggested. But still, he'd have to leave the house with the golden harp. Aunt Jen would not be likely to let that sacking swathed object pass her sharp eye without at least inquiring what was wrapped up in there, and what possible reason could anyone have, least of all her nephew, for not letting her see. Will wished not for the first time that Merriman were with him to ease such difficulties. For a master of the light, it was no greater matter to transport beings and objects, not only through space but through time in the twinkling of an eye. But for the youngest of the old ones, however acute his need, that was a talent too large. He came to the farm, rode in, pushed through the back door, but when he called, no one came. He realized suddenly with a great lightening of the spirits that he had seen no cars in the yard outside. Both his aunt and uncle must have gone out. That was one piece of luck, at any rate. He ran upstairs to his bedroom, said the necessary words to release the golden harp from protection, and ran down again with it under his arm, a rough sacking-wrapped bundle of odd triangular shape. He was halfway across the yard to the bicycle when the Land Rover chugged in through the gate. For a second, Will froze in panic. Then he walked slowly, carefully to the bicycle and turned it ready to leave. Owen Davies climbed out of the car and stood looking at him. He said, "Was it you left the gate open?" Oh gosh, Will was genuinely shocked. He had committed the classical farm sin without even noticing. "Yes, I did, Mr. Davies. That's awful. I'm most terribly sorry." Owen Davies, then in earnest, shook his flat-capped head in reproof. "One of the most important things to remember it is to shut any gate you have opened on a farm. You do not know what livestock of your uncles might have slipped out. That should have been kept in. I know you are English, and no doubt a city boy, but that is no excuse." "I know," Will said, "and I'm not even a city boy. I'm really sorry. I'll tell Uncle David so." Taken aback by his implication of honest confidence, Owen Davies surfaced abruptly from the pool of righteousness that had threatened to swallow him. "Well," he said, "let us forget that this time, both of us. I dare say you will not do it again." His gaze drifted sideways a little. "Is that Brand's bike you have there? Did he come with you?" Will pressed the shrouded harp tight between his elbow and his side. "I borrowed it. He was out riding, and I was up the valley walking, and I saw him. We both thought we'd have to go at a flying big model plane I've been making." He batted the bundle under his arm, swinging his leg over the bicycle saddle at the same time. "So I'm going back now. Is that all right? You don't need him for anything." "Oh, no," Owen Davies said. "Nothing at all. John Rollins took Penn to Mr. Jones at Tybontal safe and sound," Will said brightly. I suppose to be having dinner there. Latish," Mrs. Jones said. "Would it be all right if I took Brand back with me too, Mr. Davies, please?" The usual expression of alarmed propriety came over Owen Davies' thin face. "Oh, no, Mrs. Jones is not expecting him. There's no need to bother her with another—" Unexpectedly, he broke off. It was as if he heard something without understanding it. Puzzled, Will saw his face become oddly bemused with the look of a man dreaming a dream that he has dreamed often but never able to translate. It was a look he would never have expected to find on the face of a man so predictable and uncomplicated as Brand's father. Owen Davies stared at him full in the face, which was even more unusual. He said, "Where did you say you and Brand were playing?" Will's dignity ignored the last word. He kicked the bicycle pedal out on the moor, quite a long way up the valley, near the road. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but more than halfway to Mr. Jones's farm. "Ah," Owen Davies said vaguely. He blinked at Will, apparently back in his usual nervous person. "Well, I dare say it would be all right if Brand goes to dinner as well. John Rollins being there. Goodness knows Megan Jones is used to feeding a lot of mouths, but you must be sure to tell him he must be home before dark." "Thank you," said Will, and made off before he could change his mind, carefully closing the gate after he had ridden through. He shouted a farewell, with just time to notice Brand's father's hand slowly raised as he rode away. But he was not many yards along the road, riding awkwardly, one-handed, slowly with the harp clutched in his aching left arm, before all thought of Owen Davies was driven from his head by the Grey King. Now the valley was throbbing with power and malevolence. The sun was at its highest point, though no more than halfway up the sky in that November day. The last part of time for the fulfilling of Will's only separate quest had begun. His mind was so much occupied with the unbroken beginnings of battle that it was all his body could do to push the bicycle and himself slowly along the road. He paid little attention when a Land Rover switched past him, going fast in the same direction. Several cars had passed him already on both journeys, and in this part of the country, Land Rovers were common. There was no reason at all why this one should have differed from the rest. The cottage on the moor. Alone with a motionless sheepdog, Bran went again to the pile of rubble in the corner of the room and stared at the wearstone. So small, so ordinary, it was just like any other of the white quartz medals scattered over the land. He bent again and tried to pick it up, and felt the same throb of disbelief when it would not move. It was like the dreadful splayed attitude in which Penn lay. He was looking at the impossible. It occurred to him to wonder why he was not afraid. Perhaps it was because part of his mind did still believe these things impossible, even while he saw them clearly. What could a pebble do to him? When he went to the door of the cottage and stood staring across the valley towards Bird Rock, the crag was hard to see from here, an insignificant dark hump dwarfed by the mountain ridge behind. Yet that, too, had held the impossible. He had gone down into the depths of that rock and in an enchanted cavern encountered 3 lords of the high magic. Bran had a sudden image of the bearded figure in the sea-blue cloak, of the eyes from the hooded face holding his own, and felt a strange, urgent warmth in the remembering. He would never forget that figure, clearly the greatest of the 3. There was something particular and close about him. He had even known Kafal. Kafal! Never fear, boy, the high magic would never take your dog from you. Only the creatures of the earth can take away from another, boy. All creatures, but man more than any. Life they take, because your own race, Bran Davies, they are the only ones who will ever hurt you. The pain of loss that Bran had begun to learn to conceal struck into him like an arrow. In a great rush, his mind filled with the pictures of Kafal as a wobbly-legged puppy. Kafal following him to school, Kafal learning the signals and commands of the working sheepdog, Kafal wet with the rain, long hair pressed flat in a straight parting along his spine. Kafal running, Kafal drinking from a stream, Kafal asleep with his chin warm on Bran's foot. Kafal dead. Even he thought of Will then. It was Will's fault. If Will had never brought him to... No, Bran said aloud suddenly. He turned and glared at the Warestone. Was it trying to turn his mind to thinking ill of Will, and so to divide them? Will had said, after all, that the dark might try to reach at him in some way he would least expect. That was it, for sure. He was being influenced subtly to turn against Will. Bran felt pleased with himself for noticing so soon. You can save the effort, he said generally to the Warestone. It won't work, see? He went back to the doorway and looked out at the hills. His mind drifted back to the thought of Kafal. It was hard to keep away from the last image, the worst, yet precious, because it was the closest. He heard again the shot, and the way it echoed around the yard. He heard his father saying as Kafal lay bleeding his life out, and Caradog Pritchard sneered with success. Kafal was going for the sheep. There's no question. I cannot say that I would not have shot him myself in Caradog's place. That is the right of it. The right. So very sure his father was always of the right and the wrong. His father and all his father's friends in chapel, and most of all the minister, with his certain sure preaching of good and bad and the right way to live. For Bran, there was a pattern of discipline. Chapel twice on Sundays, listen and sit still without fidgeting, and do not commit the sins of the good book forbids. For his father it was more. Prayer meeting, sometimes twice a week, and always the necessity of behaving the way people expected a deacon to behave. There was nothing wrong with chapel and all that, but Bran knew his father gave it more of himself than any other chapel member he had ever met. He was like a driven man with anxious face and hunched shoulders, weighed down by a sense of guilt that Bran had never seemed able to fathom for himself. There was no lightness in their lives. His father's endless, meaningless penance would not allow it. Bran had never been allowed to go to the cinema and twin, and on Sundays he could do nothing at all except go to chapel and walk the hills. His father was reluctant to let him go to school, concerts, and plays. It had even taken John Rowlands a long time to persuade him to let Bran play the harp in contests at Silverbaugh. It was as if Owen Davies kept both of them, himself and Bran, locked up in a little box in the valley, bleak and lonely, out of contact with all the bright things of life, as if they were condemned to a life in jail. Bran thought, it's not fair. All I had was Kafal, and now even Kafal is gone. He could feel grief swelling in his throat, but he swallowed hard and gritted his teeth, determined not to cry. Instead, rage and resentment grew in his mind. What right had his father to make everything so grim? They were no different from other people. But that's wrong, said a voice in his mind. You are different. You are the freak with the white hair and the pale skin that will not brown in the sun, the eyes that cannot stand bright light. Whitey, they call you at school, and pale face, and there's one boy from up the valley who makes the old sign against the evil eye in your direction, if he thinks you are not looking. They don't like you. Oh, you're different, all right. Your father and your face have made you feel different all your life, so you'd be a freak inside, even if you tried to dye your hair or paint your skin. Bran strode up and down the cottage room, furious and yet puzzled. He banged one hand against the door. He felt as though his head were about to burst. He had forgotten the Warestone. It did not occur to him that this haunting, too, might be brought by the subtle workings of the dark. Everything seemed to have vanished from the world except the resentful fury against his father that flooded his mind. And then outside the cottage's broken front door, there was the crunch and squeal of a car drawing up, and Bran looked out just in time to see his father jump out of the Land Rover and stride towards the cottage. He stood still, his head singing with rage and surprise. Owen Davies pushed open the door and stood looking at him. I thought you would be here, he said. Bran said curtly, Why? His father made the strange ducking movements of his head that was one of his familiar nervous gestures. Will was up at the farm fetching something, and he said you were both up here, somewhere. He should be along soon. Bran was standing stiffly. Why are you here? Did Will make you think something was wrong? Oh, no, Owen Davies said hastily. Well then, what? But his father had seen Penn. He stood very still for a moment. Then he said gently, But something is wrong, isn't it? Bran opened his mouth and shut it again. Owen Davies came further into the room and bent over the helpless sheepdog. How was he hurt then? Was it a fall? I never saw an animal lie so. He stroked the dog's head and felt along his legs, then moved his hand to pick up one paw. Penn gave an almost inaudible whine and rolled his eyes. The paw would not move. It was not rigid or stiff. It was simply bound fast to the earth, like the Warestone. Bran's father tried each of the four paws in turn, and each time could not move any fraction of an inch. He stood up and backed slowly away, staring at Penn. Then he raised his head to look at Bran. In his eyes, a terrible fear was mingled with accusation. What have you been doing, boy? Bran said, It is the power of the Brennan and the Wid. Nonsense, Owen Davies said sharply. Superstitious nonsense. I will not have you talk of those old pagan stories as if they were true. All right, Bran said. Then it is superstitious nonsense that you cannot move the dog. It is some kind of rigor of the joints, his father said, looking at Penn. It seems to me he has broken his back, and the nerves and the muscles are all stiffened up. But There was no conviction in his voice. There's nothing wrong with him. He's not hurt. He is like that because Brand felt suddenly that it would be going much too far to tell his father about the Warestone. He said instead, "It is the malice of the Brennan Wood, through which his trickery Kafal was shot when he should not have been, and now he's trying to make it easy for that crazy Caradog Pritchard to get Penn as well." Bran, his father's voice was high with agitation. "You must not let yourself be carried away so by Kafal dying. There was no help for it, Bakken. He turned into a sheep chaser, and there was no help for it. A killer dog has to be killed," Bran said, trying to keep his voice from trembling. "He was not a killer dog, Dad, and you do not know what you are talking about, because if you do, why can you not get Penn to move 1 centimeter from where he's lying? It is the Brennan the Wid, I tell you, and there's nothing you can do." And he could tell from the apprehension in Owen Davies' eyes that deep down he believed it was the truth. "I should have known," his father said miserably. "When I found you here in this place, I should have known such things were happening." Bran stared at him. "What do you mean?" His father did not seem to hear. "Here of all places, blood will tell. They say blood will tell. She came here out of the mountains, out of the darkness, to this place, and so this is where you came too. Even without knowing, you came here, and evil comes of it again." His eyes were wide, and he was blinking very fast, looking at nothing. Suspicion of his meaning began to creep into Bran's mind like an evening mist over the valley. "Here," you keep saying. "Here. This was my house," Owen Davies said. "No," Bran said. "Oh, no. 11 years ago," Davies said, "I lived here. I didn't know, I never thought. It's been empty ever since I remember. I never thought of it being a proper house. I come here quite often when I'm out on my own. If it rains or just to sit. Sometimes he swallowed, sometimes I pretend it's my house. It belongs to Caradog Pritchard," his father said emptily. "His father kept it as a shepherd's house, but Pritchard's men live by the farm now." "I didn't realize," Bran said again. Owen Davies stood over Penn looking down. His thin shoulders bowed. He said bitterly, "The power of the Brennan the Wid, and that was what brought her out of the mountains to me, and then took her away again. Nothing else could have done it. I've tried to bring you upright, away from it all, in prayer and goodness, and all the time the Brennan the Wid has been reaching out to have you back where your mother went. You should not have come here." "But I didn't know," Bran said. Anger flared in him suddenly with like a blown spark. "How was I to know? You never told me. There's never anywhere else to go anyway. You don't let me go to Twin, never. Not even to the pool or the beach after school with the others. Where else do you let me go except out on the moors? And how was I to know I shouldn't have come here?" Davies said wretchedly, "I want to keep you free of it. It was over. It was gone. I wanted to keep you away from the past. Ah, we should never have stayed here. I should have moved away from the valley at the beginning." Bran shook his head from side to side as if trying to cast something away from it. The air in the cottage seemed to be growing oppressive, heavy, filled with prickling tension, like the forewarning of a thunderstorm. He said coldly, You never told me anything ever. I just have to do what I am told all the time. This is right, Bran. Do it. This is for the best. This is the way you must behave. You won't ever talk about my mom. You never have. I haven't got a mother. Well, that's not so unusual. There's 2 boys at school that haven't either, but I don't even know anything about mine. Only that her name was Gwen, and I know she had black hair and blue eyes, but that's only because Mrs. Rollins told me so, not you. You would never tell me anything except that she ran away when I was a baby. I don't even know whether she's alive or dead." Owen Davies said quietly, "Neither do I, boy. But I want to know what she was like." The tension sang in Bran's head like an angry sea. He was shouting now. "I want to know, and you're scared to tell me, because it must have been your fault she ran away. It was your fault. I've always known it was. You kept her shut off from everybody the way you've always kept me, and that's why she ran away." "No," his father said. He began walking unhappily to and fro in the little room. He looked at Bran anxiously, warily, as if he were a wild animal that might spring. Bran thought the wariness was that of fear. There was nothing else in his experience that he could imagine it to be. Owen Davies said stumbling over the words, "You are young, Bran. You have to understand. I have always tried to do what is right, to tell you as much as is right, not to tell you anything that might be dangerous for you." "Dangerous?" Bran said contemptuously. "How could it be dangerous to know about my mother?" For a moment, Davies' control cracked. "Look over there," he snapped, pointing at Penn. The dog still lay motionless, dreadfully flattened down, like a skin pegged out to dry. "Look at that. You say that is the work of the Brennan the Wid? And then you ask how there could be danger? My mother has nothing to do with the Brennan the Wid." But as he heard his own words, Bran stopped, staring. His father said bleakly into the silence, "That is something we shall never know." "What do you mean?" "Listen, I do not know where she went. Out of the mountains she came, and back into the mountains she went, in the end, and none of us saw her again, ever." Owen Davies was forcing the words out, one by one, with difficulty, as if each one gave him pain. "She went of her own choice. She ran away, and none knew why. I did not drive her away." His voice cracked suddenly. "Drive her away. It's a Christ, boy. I was out of my head up in those hills looking for her, and never finding, calling, and never a word in return, and no sound anywhere but the birds crying, and the sheep, and the wind, and an empty wine in my ears, and the Brennan Wid behind his mist over Cater and Lewin Minguil, listening to the echo of my voice calling, smiling to himself that I should never know where she had gone. The anguish in his voice was so clear and unashamed that Bran fell silent, unable to break in. Owen Davies looked at him. He said quietly, I suppose it is time to tell you since we have started this. I have had to wait, you see, until you were old enough to begin to understand. I am your legal father, Bran, because I adopted you right at the beginning. I have had you from when you were a baby, and God knows I am your father in my heart and soul. But you are not born to me and your mother. I cannot tell you who your real father was. She never said a word about him. When she came out of the mountains, out of nowhere she brought you with her. She stayed with me for 3 days, and then she went away forever, and took a part of me with her. His voice shook, then steadied. She left me a note. He took his battered leather wallet out of his pocket, and drew from an inner flap a small piece of paper. Unfolding it with great gentleness, and he handed it to Bran. The paper was creased and fragile, almost parting at the folds. It bore only a few penciled words in a strangely rounded hand. His name is Bran. Thank you, Owen Davies. Bran folded the note again, very slowly and carefully, and handed it back. It was all she left me of herself, Bran, said his father. That note, and you. Bran could think of no words to say. His head was crowded with jarring images and questions, a crossroads with a dozen turnings and no sign of which to follow. He thought as he had thought 1,000 times since he was old enough of the enigma that was his mother, faceless, voiceless, her place in his life nothing but an aching absence. Now across the years she had brought him another absence, another emptiness. It was as if she were trying to take away his father as well. At any rate, the father who, whatever their differences, he had always thought of it as his own. Resentment and confusion rose and fell in Bran's mind like the wind. He thought wildly, who am I? He looked at Pam in the cottage and the Weirstone and the Brennan Wid. He heard again his father's bitter remembering. The Brennan Wid behind his mist over Cater and Wingil. The names re-echoed round his head, and he could not understand why they should. Lin, Wingil, Ta Wylin. The roaring in his head grew. It seemed to come from the Weirstone. He looked toward the stone, and again, as when Will had been there, the cottage seemed to grow dark, and the point of blue light began to shine out of the dim corner, and suddenly Bran had a strange jolting awareness of a part of his mind he had never been conscious of before. It was as if the door were opening somewhere within him, and he did not know what he would find on the other side. Flashing through his consciousness came a quick array of images, making no sense like a dream dreamed while waking. He thought he saw the mist swirling on the mountain, and in it the tall blue-cloaked figure of the Lord Will called Merriman, hooded, his head bent, and his arm outstretched, pointing down into the valley at the cottage in which Bran now stood. For a flash, Bran saw a woman with black hair blowing, and he felt washed by love and tenderness, so that in longing he almost cried out to keep the feeling from flickering away. But then it was gone, and the mist swirled, and then again the hooded figure was there, and the woman too, looking back at the cottage, stretching out her arms in yearning. Then the figure of the Lord called Merriman swept his robed arm around the woman, and they were both gone, vanished into the mist, out of sight, and, he knew, of the world. He saw only one other image, far below, through a break in the mist, the water of a distant lake glimmering like a lost jewel. Bran did not understand. He knew that somehow he was seeing something out of the past concerning his mother, but there was not enough. What had Merriman to do with her coming, with its beginning and its end? He blinked and found he was staring at his father again. Davy's eyes were wide in concern. He was clutching Bran's arm and calling his name. And in the new part of his mind that he had not seen before, Bran knew suddenly that he had now the power to do more things than he could ordinarily have done. He forgot all else that had happened that day, thinking only of the glint of his mother on a mountain over a glinting lake. All at once he wanted only to get to Tal Wylin and the slopes of Cader Idris, to find out if this new part of his mind could sense there some further memory of the way he had begun. And he knew he could do something else too. Leaping up, he called to the dog in a strong voice that seemed hardly his own. Tur Yama Pen. And out of his flat-pressed paralysis, the black sheepdog instantly rose and leapt, and the boy and the dog ran out and away across the moor. Owen Davies, his face lined old in fear and concern, stood silently watching for a moment. Then he moved heavily out to the car and drove away from the cottage along the road to Idris Jones's farm.